The billion-dollar Cold War mission that was doomed before it left port. Steel screamed somewhere below the waves, and the ship shuddered like a lung punched empty. On deck, no one yelled. They listened to weight move where weight shouldn't. A billion-dollar claw was holding half a Soviet submarine, and then it was. You think Cold War secrets lived in vaults? They lived in rhythms, barge schedules, weather windows, and a cover story wearing Howard Hughes's name. The twist: the mission to steal K-129's bones was compromised before it sailed. A leak didn't hand over coordinates, it handed over tempo. To see how a silent ocean turned into a trap, we have to start where the silence began. The wreck that started it, K-129 Vanishes. Late winter 1968. The North Pacific is a grinder. The Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 clears Rybachi Naval Base and slides into grey water for what should be a routine deterrent patrol, its third since overhaul. 98 men aboard, 3 nuclear-armed SS and 4 missiles racked in the hull. Orders say go quiet and stay gone. Then the radio misses a report. In Moscow, a missing missile boat is a broken line in the second strike equation. In Washington, it's an opening you don't admit you're hoping for. Families on both coasts of the ocean keep kettles warm and expectations low. Officers hold options they can't say out loud. Soviet searchers fan out. Surface ships, aircraft, submarines. Lanes swept where K-129 should have been, then lanes nobody likes to patrol. Nothing obvious. No oil ribbons, no debris, no flares, just winter's flat refusal. The official hunt burns fuel and hope, then sours. Meanwhile, the ocean talks in a register humans can't hear. American hydrophone lines, SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, sit on the seabed listening for long, low whispers. Early March 1968, a sharp, unnatural acoustic event pops on analysts' scopes. Not thunder, not geology. Heavy. They run bearings, cross them, and the Pacific collapses to a rough box about 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. It isn't a street address. It's enough to point a camera. A US submarine built for quiet work gets the nod. Not to shoot, to find. She drags sensors like fingertips over an abyss. Weeks turn to months. Electronics sulk in the cold. Currents move silt and soften edges. Patience wins what speed would break. A field of metal on a plain of mud. A shape like a conning tower. Torn sections. The missile compartment crumpled in on itself. Depth, roughly 16,500 feet. Pressure like a verdict. The stakes jump. If America can see K-129, maybe America can touch it. Metallurgy, compartment layouts, wiring choices, valve standards, tiny truths that add up to tactics. Maybe more, missile interfaces, crypto-adjacent hardware, even code material if the sea was merciful. If the Soviets find the wreck first, the window closes. If nobody does, the mystery joins 1968's ugly list. Dakar, Minerve, Scorpion. Washington locks the find behind layered compartments. Few know coordinates, fewer know the target. Almost nobody knows both, but secrecy has a rhythm. Procurement orders shift. Travel patterns converge on certain shops. Cover companies sprout paperwork. Footprints don't need megaphones, they just need time. Moscow senses absence and fills it with resolve. Officially, the fleet mourns. Unofficially, ships start loitering in ways that map suspicion, not fishing. Grief sails in formation. Analysts on both sides stare at plots and pretend they're just dots. Inside a Langley conference room, someone says it out loud. Bring up the boat. The Navy flinches at the physics. The CIA's science and tech crowd sketches a straight line from seafloor to moon pool and writes one number on a board, 16,500 feet. That's not ocean, that's a load case. You can't sling a submarine like a piano. You build a steel spine out of drill pipe 3 miles long, hang a capture vehicle, Clementon, under it, cradle the wreck on structure, not skin, and climb without jolts. Engineers split into 2 camps, whole hull dreamers and partial grab realists. Both groups fear the same thing, corrosion turned to glass. Fingers crush plating, plating lets go, prize becomes confetti. Heave compensation becomes religion, hydraulics that cancel the ship's vertical punch so cracks don't breed in threads. Models snarl, Metallurgists sweat. The ocean doesn't negotiate, it tests. Cover is a second engineering problem. Enter Howard Hughes as myth and mask. Deep-sea manganese nodule mining is plausible, weird, and loud enough to hide a new leviathan with a hole in its belly. Shells, fronts, and invoices do their dance. The story works because it can be performed. Core boxes, lab coats, samples that look like science. Meanwhile, the human math stacks. A draftsman in Long Beach is told a tolerance can't move. A procurement officer in Houston is told a deadline can't slip. A young case officer learns to speak half-truths with a straight face. A sailor on a quiet submarine stares at a monitor and whispers a grid he can't explain. On the other side, a wife in Petropavlovsk waits for a knock that will bring a medal and a silence. Finding K-129 feels like victory. It's a wager. Every foot of lift will try to break the machine that lifts. Every ounce of secrecy will make the outline sharper for anyone already watching. The plan is simple to say and brutal to do. A ship with dynamic positioning, a hidden moon pool, a pipe string to the abyss, and a claw designed to feel its way across a grave. Here's the hinge the story turns on. The ocean keeps secrets. People keep schedules. Schedules build patterns. Patterns get read. In those early weeks, the mission's strength, compartmented silence, starts acting like a beacon. A leak doesn't have to shout. It can hum. And somewhere in that hum, a trap starts knitting itself, patient as pressure. The impossible idea: build a ship to steal a sub. In the room, the words were plain and insane. Full recovery. Not a camera run. Not a sample. Bring up the boat. The board still had that number, 16,500 feet, staring back like a dare. Every engineer knew what it meant. At that depth, steel isn't metal. It's memory under punishment. Every pulse of heave, every gust, every micro-twist moves through a chain of joints that would rather be anywhere else. They split fast into two tribes. One said go for the whole hull, missile bay and all. The other said take what physics will give, cut, cradle, and accept a partial. Both drew the same enemy on their napkins: corrosion that made plating the consistency of eggshells. You can't grab thin skin. You have to bear on structure that still remembers being strong. That meant a capture vehicle shaped less like a claw and more like a skeletal cradle. Fingers that snake under frames. Pads that feel pressure and stop before they break faith. So the plan hardened. A ship with dynamic positioning to freeze over an invisible moon pool. A 3-mile column of drill pipe lowered section by section until it kissed the bottom. Heave compensation tall as a house to cancel the ship's breathing so cracks didn't breed in threads. At the end, Clementine, fingers, hinges, sills and sensors, descending to read a dead submarine's bones by touch and light. The math argued back. Torsion would twist the string like licorice. Fatigue would hunt the weakest joint and weight. Metallurgists highlighted grain structures and fatigue curves. They didn't lecture, they warned. Heave comp got bulked up. Thrusters got smarter. The control brain had to read wind, wave, and current and move the hull with a pianist's hands. If it drifted a few feet, 3 miles of pipe would whisper its anger into every thread. Cover wasn't a memo. It was an entire industry in costume. Howard Hughes's legend gave the story gravity. Manganese nodules made it sound like the future. Papers said mining. Decks would have to look like mining. That meant labs with core boxes, ore hoppers on show, and a communications plan that could sell curiosity without sounding rehearsed. Shell companies bloomed. Contracts threaded through holding firms that were desks, phones, and locked drawers. The lie worked because it could be performed at scale. Money climbed in silence. Numbers that started with 300s learned to say 800 million without blinking. Not in one gulp, in compartments, in subcontracts, in rush orders for bearings nobody in commercial drilling usually buys. Congress saw slivers. The rest lived in rooms with no windows. The people on the shop floor didn't need the whole picture. They needed tolerances that wouldn't move and deadlines that wouldn't slip. Meanwhile, small doubts accumulated like filings on a magnet. What if the center of gravity is wrong by 2 feet? What if suction holds the hull like glue? What if a finger slips and turns a frame into knives? They built models in secret tanks. They loaded sacrificial structures and let Clementine feel for failure. Each fix added weight. Every pound walked back up the pipe to the ship. Safety margins ate payload until both were nervous. Logistics wrote their own thriller. A submersible barge, HMB-1, would hide Clementon, let crews assemble and make the capture vehicle out of sight, then flood, sink, and rise beneath the ship to pass the secret up through the moon pool. Pipe joints needed serials, inspections, anti-gall compounds, storage, and a choreography that let men feed a steel spine to the sea for days without a single cross thread. Barges would run fuel, food, and pipe under a schedule that looked like commerce. The weather window wasn't a suggestion, it was law. North Pacific summer gives you stretches of less bad, not good. The ship's thrusters would be fighting wind and swell without pause. The heave system would live at the ragged edge of what hydraulics like to do. The ascent would be measured in feet per minute, with no forgiveness for a single jolt. If the ship sneezed, a joint 3 miles down would catch the cold. Security tried to narrow the circle, but narrow circles draw clean outlines. A procurement analyst noticed exotic alloys hitting docks early. A scheduler watched travel clusters form around Long Beach and Redwood City. A contractor liaison collected clearances for specialists in dynamic positioning and didn't ask why. None of them knew the target. Together, their rhythm hummed. Somewhere, someone listened. On paper, it held. Clementon would descend, test pad pressures, find ribs, lock hinges, and rise. The moon pool doors would open like a throat, and the ocean would swallow its own absence as the ship took weight. The cover would play for any camera brave enough to ask. The ship would look like industry while committing espionage in daylight. Here's the part the whiteboards couldn't draw. Engineering solves force. Secrecy solves attention. Both are load cases. Both crack at stress rises you miss because you want the model to hold. The plan was brilliant. It was also brittle. The ocean would test the steel. The other side would test the story. And if either failed, the sound you'd hear wouldn't be a snap. It would be a decision traveling up a pipe into men's teeth. The leak, a mole, with a front row seat. Silence was the armor. It was also the tell. The same few rooms, the same faces, the same Thursdays, patterns tight enough to be read by anyone close enough to feel the heat off the coffee. The leak didn't sit at the head table. He sat 2 chairs back with access to logistics, not coordinates, to travel rosters, not target names. That was enough. Rhythm beats secrets. He handled the boring gold, purchase orders for exotic bearings, rush shipments of drill pipe couplings, hotel blocks near Redwood City and Long Beach that lined up with engineering reviews. The memos he touched used phrases like summer window, station keeping tolerance, and Hughes cover elements. He couldn't print them. He didn't need to. He memorized cadence. What did he pass? Not K129, not latitude and longitude. He passed a metronome, a ship of unprecedented design, a timed weather breath in late July into early August, a cover story that would require oceanographic pantomime, and a delicate lift that demanded weeks on station. He drew no maps. He traced the drumbeat of a mission that couldn't afford an audience. On the Soviet side, a subtle choreography began. Orders in Vladivostok and Petropavlovsk shifted by inches. Research. Hulls with nets they rarely wet received fuel to loiter along lanes that weren't productive for fish, but were perfect for watching patients. Trawlers carried antennas that didn't match their tonnage. Hydrographic ships scheduled, sampling, arcs through squares that mirrored an American weather model you could build from open forecasts. Back home, small alarms flickered and died in compartments. A Navy auditor noticed exotic alloys funneled through a shell that didn't do oil. An NSA analyst flagged maritime chatter about industrial sampling in grid boxes where nobody used to care. A CIA security officer logged 2 odd job queries for front office. Same mispronunciation of the company name, same script of harmless questions. Each alert hit a wall called Need to Know and slid to the floor. The mole didn't rush. He kept his valve half open, passing tempo, not trivia. When the build schedule compressed to make the weather window, Soviet loiter patterns compressed too. When barge traffic out of Long Beach threaded a mild forecast, fishing tracks stitched a parallel seam across empty sea. It wasn't proof in a court. It was proof in a watchstander's gut. Inside the program, tension spread in quiet ways. A young engineer asked why trawlers kept showing up near a California test area. His boss told him to run the numbers and ignore the horizon. A procurement clerk started taking different routes to work because a sedan she didn't recognize showed up twice too often. A case officer walked out of a meeting early, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Silence had grown edges. Here's the knife's twist. The tighter the compartments, the clearer the outline. When a program stops making noise in one city and starts humming in another, the gap glows for anyone mapping absences. The cover mining wasn't failing. It was succeeding so consistently that its reliability became a signature. Real science is messy. This science kept perfect time. Some inside argued for a delay. Shift the window. Change the resupply lanes. Scramble the rhythm. Budgets, contracts, and North Pacific weather answered back. The clock was cooking the plan. Thrusters had been tuned, heave compensation tested, HMB1 scheduled. A pause would trigger questions up and down a supply chain that already looked like a board with too many pushpins. Meanwhile, the mole watched his own risk curve. He never named ships. He never named men. He never touched the coordinates vault. He passed phrases and tempo to a handler who preferred fragments to fireworks. The handler understood the ocean's math. You don't need a street address to be present. You need a reason to wait in the right neighborhood. Stakes turned human. If the other side parked nearby, calm and patient, the lift had to be perfect. No jolts, no pauses, no hiccup that would throw a shadow on a deck camera. If a partial recovery happened, the worst case wasn't embarrassment. It was arriving home with fragments while your adversary arrived home with confidence. Confidence is doctrine fuel. There were moments when proof almost surfaced. A memo months later would show a Soviet trawler extending its loiter exactly when the Glomar's testing got shaved to hit the window. A comms tech would match harmless lab bursts to shift changes on HeaveCom. A contracting conduit would decline a promotion that cut his visibility, choosing access over money. Each clue was a bead. Nobody strung them before the ship sailed. The leak wasn't glamorous, it was granular. It didn't blow a cover, it tuned an audience. The mission's strength, predictable competence under a flawless mask, became the thing the other side counted on. They'll be there then, doing that for this long. That sentence doesn't need a map. It needs a chair, a radio, and patience. Psychology, not physics, set the trap. People love rhythms. Planners love schedules. Engineers love windows. Operators love rehearsals. The mole didn't fight those loves. He surfed them. By the time the Glomar's paint dried, the Soviets didn't have to guess. They had a pulse to match. And out in the box where steel would meet its old grief, an audience took its seats without clapping. Building the Leviathan, the Glomar Explorer comes alive. They started by teaching a ship to lie. Hull plates went down broad and calm, a rectangle of steel meant to sit like a table in angry water. Below the waterline, thrusters circled her like muscles around a spine, each ready to nudge her back when wind and swell tried to push. At the center was the secret, a moon pool, a mouth in the belly where the ocean could rise inside, unseen. Industry on the outside, espionage in the core. Launched in June 1974 under the Hughes banner, the Glomar Explorer had to do 3 jobs at once. Be a believable mining platform, hold station over a point the size of a tennis court, and swallow a Soviet submarine in silence. Stakes were everywhere. Drift 10 feet, and 3 miles of pipe would twist like a spring. Stall a moon pool door, and the capture vehicle would hang between daylight and cover. Blink on the control system, and every joint would feel a jolt. It wasn't designed to survive. Action looked like welding arcs, sleepless benches, and arguments with needles on gauges. Global Marine's dynamic positioning brain grew out of racks of gyros and analog computers that turned wind and wave into math a hull could obey. Heave compensation rams, tall as trees, learned a strange ballet. Push when the ocean pulled, yield when it shoved, so the pipe didn't pick up the ship's breathing. Controllers drilled handovers at the console because hands get tired long before steel admits it. Meanwhile, in a sealed bay, Clementine took form. Not a cartoon claw, more a lattice of ribs and sills built to bear on frames, not thin plating. Fingers hinged and rehinged as metallurgists argued over alloys that wouldn't turn brittle in cold, high pressure. Pressure pads turned contact into numbers the operators could feel with their eyes. Cameras peered from armored housings beside floodlights with shrouds, so backscatter wouldn't blind the pilots in their own snowstorm of silt. A problem kept slipping out of meetings like a draft, crush risk. Soviet steel had been shocked by catastrophe, then salted for 6 years at roughly 16,500 feet. The claw had to be strong and gentle at once, so they spread load, more beams, more sills, more weight. Every pound walked back up the pipe math and landed on deck as a new argument with ballast and joint stress. The system held on paper, but paper prefers perfect weather. Logistics became a magic trick you could watch and still not see. The Hughes mining barge, HMB-1, hid Clementon inside a floating box. Crews assembled, tested, and mated the capture vehicle away from lenses, then flooded the barge, sank it, and let the ship rise above to take delivery through the moon pool. In port, the choreography had to look boring. Pipe joints with fresh threads received serials, inspections, and anti-gall compound, then stacked like cordwood with just enough theatre. The descent, contact with the dead. They waited for a weather breath that wasn't kind, just less cruel. Then a quiet word on the net. Begin. The drill floor woke up. Pins clacked, tongs bit, and the first joint of pipe slid through the moon pool into black water that ate light like it was hungry. Joint after joint followed. Each one talked, stamped, logged. The ship held her spot like a man holding his breath, thrusters whispering corrections no eye could see. Stakes were simple and heavy. 3 miles of steel hung from the belly of a ship that couldn't drift a dozen feet without putting torsion into every thread. Heave compensation groaned and breathed, turning the ocean's punch into something the pipe could forgive. If a joint seized at depth, nobody could walk it off with a wrench. If the string bowed, it could whip and shear. There was no backup plan that didn't end in silence. The descent felt like hours poured into a long, dark funnel. Operators watched needles and numbers as if they were faces. Tension climbed in a careful staircase. Talk settled, then twitched when a wave and a gust found each other. The compensators pushed back and the twitch smoothed. You don't fix the sea. You coax it into forgetting you exist. Meanwhile, on the grey edge of the box, 2 Soviet trawlers drifted like they had nowhere better to be. Nets went down, came up clean, went down again. Antennas a size too proud for fishing turned slowly, staring at a sky that looked empty. They weren't hunting fish. They were measuring time. Clementon took weight with a shudder you felt in deck plates. Cameras bloomed into snow, silt, plankton, backscatter. Floodlights carved tunnels that ended in brown fog. Sonar painted a low hill where broken frames had become terrain. The voice on the downlink kept the room small. 5 degrees starboard. Ease, hold. Fingers opened and closed in patient tests, the pressure pads sending back a language of force the pilots learned by feel. Touchdown wasn't a thud, it was a negotiation. The capture fingers slid under torn edges and backed away from plating that would crumble if hugged. They searched for ribs that still remembered being strong. A pad read a number that said enough. Another read, not yet. They moved in millimeters. You can't muscle a dead boat at 16,500 feet. You ask it to come with you. Up top, nobody passed coffee. Men stared at gauges like they were windows. A chief who never prayed before prayed now, not for triumph, just for no surprises. A case officer pressed his thumb into his palm until it hurt, because the pain kept his mind from wandering to what bodies would look like in cold black water. A young engineer mouthed numbers like they were charms. Lock the first hinge. The pipe sang a note you couldn't hear so much as feel in your teeth. Lock the second. The ship trimmed ballast and settled, the compensators exhaling to keep the string from remembering the hull's breath. The pads read evenly enough across 3 points. Someone let out a breath like he was afraid the air would tip the scale. The lift began in whispers. 1 ton less on the mud, 1 ton more on the ship. Suction didn't let go. It argued. The operators eased ascent speed to a number that looked like patience. Telemetry flickered when a camera kissed silt and went blind, then came back in static and grit. The computer kept the flags green, except for 1 blink when wind and swell tried to line up. Thrusters hunted, found, and the blink died. Halfway off the bottom, the pipe carried the story of every wave the hull had met. Tiny torsion pulses ran down the string like gossip. Metallurgists somewhere on shore had warned about fatigue breeding in threads. On deck, the warnings became a small superstition. Nobody said good when a number held. They said steady and looked away. Meanwhile, in the grey, a trawler's skipper took a note from a man who didn't look like a fisherman. Maintain course. Report anomalous soundings. The skipper shrugged. He'd been paid to be patient. Patience was easy when the radio stayed quiet and the sea was a slate. At depth, Clementon climbed with a grace that didn't belong to steel. Then a groan came up the pipe like a long, slow regret, not a snap, a decision. Telemetry hiccuped, then climbed in a jagged run. The operator whispered to the ship and trimmed to dead slow. The trace stuttered again. Weight shifted in a way that meant the wreck wasn't a single thing anymore. 2/3 of the hull gave up in a rush that felt like weather moving through metal. Tension dropped hard, paused, dropped again. Something heavy fell away into black, silent for a long count, then a slow thud came back as a vibration in the string. The room listened to absence. The operator kept the climb alive by ounces. Up through the moon pool came the smell first. Old oil, salt, something like a harbor at night. The piece rose slow, bent plating, a slice of bulkhead, cables that once carried orders, and bodies, not many, enough to take the air out of the deck. Work stopped without anyone calling it. Later accounts would say several remains were recovered and given burial at sea with honors. In that moment, men looked away, then looked back, because respect is a kind of steadiness too. The lift continued in inches. Ballast shifted to tame a center of gravity that had moved somewhere inconvenient. The pipe creaked like a door thinking about its hinges. Numbers held. The ship breathed without passing it down the string. The ocean didn't cheer. It doesn't do that. It grades. On the grey horizon, the trawlers didn't surge or flee. They just were like facts. Calm, patient, present. The audience a good heist never wants. And on a steel deck far from any shore, men learned what it feels like when physics keeps its promises and mercy does not. The break, what fell back into the dark. It didn't fail like a movie prop. It failed like something old remembering how to let go. A long, low groan traveled up the pipe, through the decks into teeth. Not a crack, a surrender. The tension trace jagged upward, then dipped like it had missed a step. One word on the net, hold. Stakes turned from theory to anatomy. If the load tore free all at once, the pipe could whip, joints could unzip, the moon pool could become a mouth that bit its own tongue. If it let go in pieces, falling sections could scythe the string, twist Clementon sideways into knives made from frames. Worst of all, a partial cling could turn the whole assembly into a lever with no fulcrum, asking weak joints to act strong. Action crowded the room. Controllers eased ascent speed until the number looked like stillness. Heave comp breathed in quarter notes, stealing inches from waves before the ocean could pass its punch to the pipe. Thrusters whispered against one another to keep the hull pinned to a box no eye could see. Downlink showed snow, then a smear of structure, then nothing but grit again. Somewhere below, load redistributed itself with the logic of corrosion. A high metallic whine peeped from a clamp and died when an operator stole a few pounds from the string. Another hiccup on the trace. Then a sudden, heavy absence, like a thought removed mid-sentence. Tension dropped a third in one blink, paused in a mean stillness, then dropped again. Something large was falling away into black where nothing falls quickly. Men counted beats they couldn't hear and felt a soft thud return as a shiver in steel. 2/3 gone. Not a measurement, a feeling. The remaining piece tugged off-center, shifting the center of gravity so the spine above had to relearn itself. Ballast tanks took on and bled water like lungs in a slow panic. The dynamic positioning brain trimmed and retrimmed. A controller whispered to a machine he called she, and steady in the same breath. The room didn't breathe, the ship did. Inch by inch, the pipe remembered it was a column and not a whip. The ascent became a crawl that wouldn't scare a snail. Nobody said almost. They said numbers. They said copies. They said Roger. They didn't say good. Up through the moon pool, the survivor surfaced like a memory that refused to stay buried. The smell arrived first, old oil, salt, and rust so fine it tasted like pennies. Bent plating, a slice of bulkhead, cable snarls that once carried commands, scars that didn't belong to collapse alone, and bodies, few still and preserved by cold. Work paused without orders. Men took off gloves as if bare hands could apologize. Later, they would be wrapped, honored, and given to the sea with words that crossed borders better than politics. Shock moved in straight lines. The team secured what they had like it was both evidence and a guest. Straps found steel. Tags found surfaces. Cameras found angles that told stories without telling all of them. A chaplain without a title spoke in a voice that made men stand a little straighter. The burial was quiet on purpose. Flags, music damped by wind, simple words, no chest beating. The film would live in a safe, and then in a second country years later. Back at the console, nobody could afford reverence long. A shifted center meant every foot up was a new problem. The pipe creaked like a hinge deciding whether to be loyal. Heave comp kept the ship's breath from walking down the string. One bad gust lined up with one honest swell and tried to lean the world. Thrusters argued back and won by a hair. The operators trimmed ascent to a crawl that felt like penance. Across the grey horizon, the trawlers didn't change speed. They didn't blink. They didn't even look interested. They simply were present, patient, confident enough to make absence feel like proof. If they were guessing, it was a precise guess. If they weren't, the calm was earned. Either way, the message landed. They'd budgeted for our ambition, and their math held. In the control room, the vocabulary shifted to survival. Partial recovery took shape as a phrase that comforted budgets and bruised pride. Engineers said anomalous fracture because steel likes that word better than broke. Metallurgists would later draw neat lines through torn metal and call them logical. A chief stared at those lines and heard a sentence without consonants. You were never bringing the whole thing home. What the deck crew saw was simpler. The ocean kept most of what it had taken and lent back a lesson. The ship took that lesson aboard and strapped it down. Clementine, scarred and exhausted, hung in the moon pool like a tired hand. The pipe came apart in the reverse of its making, joint by joint, logged, wiped, set aside with a care that bordered on tenderness. The last joint cleared the water. The moon pool doors closed with the quietest clunk anyone had ever heard. Debrief started before the deck dried. Words fitted themselves into boxes that would travel better than truth. Demonstrated capability because anything came up at all. Significant material recovered because fragments have weight. Handled remains with honor because that part was clean. Nobody wrote the sentence that would have emptied the room. The other side watched us fail gently. A few voices murmured about the shape of the break, the way load paths seemed to know where to go, the way scars hinted at hands that weren't ours. Others shook their heads. Depth and time make their own artisans. Absence is not evidence. The argument floated there, heavy and unresolved, like a boy nobody wanted to claim. They turned east with less steel than they'd hoped and more gravity than they wanted. The ocean closed over what fell back without leaving a mark. On the chart, the box became an empty square again. On the ship, the empty had edges, tension traces, tag numbers, a folded flag, and a silence that didn't feel like secrecy so much as respect and unfinished business. Out on the grey line, the trawlers held course, unhurried, unbothered, as if the show had ended exactly on time. The paper trail, signals, shadows, and a pattern. They steamed east with fragments and a folded flag. The noise started on land. In a fluorescent room far from the sea, someone stacked the boring pages, pipe serials, tension traces, thruster logs, radio schedules, barge arrivals, hotel blocks, rental cars, port agent receipts. Side by side, the pages stopped being boring. Patterns live in neighbors. Stakes first. If the rhythm of the mission could be heard after the fact, it could have been heard before. If a mole had mirrored tempo to Moscow, every coincidental trawler wasn't luck. It was choreography. That matters because doctrine gets built on myths. A myth that secrecy equals invisibility is a bad foundation. It cracks under weight. Action began with procurement grit. A Navy auditor flagged rush orders for high-precision bearings and exotic alloys from suppliers that never shared jobs. paid through a Hughes-connected shell that didn't smell like oil. The timing clustered ahead of the weather window by just enough to load a barge. On a separate floor, a logistics analyst pinned barge runs from Long Beach to forecasts and traced a waltz. Resupplies surfing the same, less bad, sees the plan had circled months earlier. In a comms closet, a tech-matched harmless, mining, lab bursts to heave comp shift changes. Same minutes, different story. Meanwhile, across town, NSA pulled Soviet maritime chatter for that summer and laid it against the Glomar's tempo. The content was bland, repeat sampling, station maintain, device patience. The timing was, each time a support tug slipped its berth, a trawler's radiogram ticked that day. Not messages that revealed anything, messages that matched. 2 metronomes, 1 song. Impact landed as a name you could Google. A mid-level contracting conduit who touched travel schedules, clearance rosters, parts requisitions. Nothing glamorous, everything useful. His calendar mapped neatly onto barge bookings and security briefings. When he took a day trip to DC, a Soviet research. Hull topped off fuel at Petropavlovsk 1 day later. Correlation doesn't convict. It does demand a meeting. That meeting filled with people who don't share cafeterias. CIA security wanted the circle smaller. Navy wanted more eyes on the technicals. NSA wanted to keep listening until the signal sang loud enough for court. A woman from counterintelligence spoke in plain time. We don't need a confession. We need causality you can't shrug off. The room nodded without agreeing. They pulled more threads. Travel vouchers showed hotel clusters near Redwood City, Long Beach, and Houston, always a week before large material receipts. Phones lit up in those same hours with calls to innocuous numbers that turned out to be switchboards. Answer and forward, nothing to see. Visitor logs from a front office looked neat to the point of artificial. Identical handwriting, even spacing, tidy spellings of names it took insiders years to learn. Real people don't sign like that. Surveillance teams do. Stakes climbed. If they moved on a suspect without hard proof, they'd spook the other side and burn collection. If they sat on it, they'd let a rhythm leak become doctrine. Meanwhile, an investigative team on the West Coast started sniffing around the Hughes burglary and a very odd mining ship. Time wasn't a friend. Action kept turning paper into shape. A Navy linguist lined Soviet phrases, station maintain, repeat sample, device patience, against internal console language, hold station, maintain tension, device stabilization. Nobody thought the Soviets were parroting us. They were syncing behavior. It takes knowledge to be that calm. Then a memo surfaced from months earlier, stamped with warnings, ignored by compartments. It noted that the weak Glomar shaved testing to hit the window, a Soviet trawler extended loiter in the right patch of empty ocean. The memo died in a stack then. In this room, it burned. The lesson wasn't subtle. The mission changed rhythm. The audience matched it. Impact settled into 3 options. CIA argued to quietly turn the conduit and feed Moscow a counterfeit beat, see what appetite they had. Navy pushed to lock him out and retime everything, kill the rhythm. NSA wanted to widen the ear and wait for a clean, provable handoff. The compromise was the enemy. Weather, budgets, and press interest were closing in. Every day salted the files with more patterns someone else could read. Psychology crept in where math already lived. People love schedules because they promise control. Schedules are signatures. The cover had performed too well, or samples, lab coats, clean decks, so well that their reliability became a tell. Real research stutters. Our performance never missed its mark. A case officer said it out loud. Silence is a signal when it moves. Rooms stopped humming on the Gulf Coast and started humming in Long Beach. Shipyard gates emptied at midnight in one city and filled at dawn in another. Crews booked out of one hotel block and into the next with perfect, repeated arcs. If you weren't in the compartments, you could still follow the shape by watching where noise went missing. In the end, the pattern wrote the debrief. The leak hadn't handed over coordinates. It had handed over a clock. The Soviets parked nearby, calm and patient, because they knew when patience would pay. They didn't need to confront us. They needed to be present while gravity and corrosion did the arguing. The meaning hit harder than blame. Rhythm kills secrets. Kill rhythm or it kills you. The ocean keeps its dead. Paper keeps your habits. And habits are what your rivals learn to trust. The Soviet counter, recovering their own secrets first. While Glomar turned east with fragments and a folded flag, Moscow did triage, not theater, inventory. If Americans had touched K-129, what's still on the seafloor could hurt tomorrow. Crypto, fire control, missile interfaces had to be found, mapped, or denied value. This mindset began in 1968. After the official search, oceanography plans quietly threaded a suspicion box northwest of Hawaii. The returns were muddy and distant, but hinted at metal where geology shouldn't sing. Next came survey disguised as fishing. Research, trawlers loitered where nets made poor money but good cover. Deck cranes moved quiet frames that scratched bottom for clues, a stamped connector, a hinge pin with a date, a length of shielded cable that told you what frequencies the boat had cared about. We hit a claw, they brought a rake. In shore labs, officers built a matrix. Protect crypto first, then missile fire control, then metallurgy and fittings. The matrix didn't just rank value, it told ships where to scrape and where to bury. Make the critical ungrabbable, a few careful drags to deepen silt over a safe, a twist to trap a component beneath a frame that would snap under hoist. Treat the ocean like a contested archive. Smear the ink on the pages that matter and tear out the ones worth memorizing. Evidence later looked like nature, plumes larger than calm season models, fresh scuffs that didn't fit collapse alone, gaps where reinforcement should have been. Each anomaly had a neat, boring explanation: time, pressure, currents. But if you stood where those survey ships lingered, a different story whispered. Someone tidied the archive. Calm was the point. Industrial sampling logged in plain language, fuel budgets paid for patience. Radio said little, consistently. When Glomar's lift sheared, Soviet hulls didn't surge or flee. They maintained course as if a partial had already been priced into the season. No trophies on Red Square, just reports. Areas disturbed, structures compromised, items possibly removed by foreign party, no confrontation. Those reports hardened doctrine. Bastions tightened, patrols shortened. Silence was rehearsed. And on the Pacific floor, what we didn't lift stayed under silt someone else had thoughtfully stirred. So the next claw, if it ever came, would meet a little more fog and a little less prize. Exposure risk, the press, the break-in, the Glomar response. While the ship turned east, Lowe's Angels lit a match. June 1974, thieves hit a Hughes-linked office. Not glamour admin, they wanted cash. They left curiosity with receipts. A detective bragged to a stringer. An editor called a maritime reporter who had already circled a broad-shouldered, mining ship with a derrick that didn't look like oil work. Hughes' Glomar Explorer. Stakes went public without press conferences. If the cover was about to be probed by people who don't do classification, the mask had to perform under spotlights, not binoculars. Phones warmed from Langley to the White House counsel's office. One question moved room to room. How do you keep a secret alive without lying on the record? Quiet visits framed it as national security, not scandal. Editors agreed to hold drafts for days, not months, if they could get a boundary they could live with. Government lawyers workshopped a posture into a sentence. We can neither confirm nor deny the existence of records responsive to your request. The Glomar response was born, polite, empty, and exactly what the moment required. Reporters pushed because that's the job. A columnist drafted Submarine. The call back wasn't a threat. It was a picture ongoing operations, foreign watchstanders, a window where an incautious noun could force a confrontation. He paused, then didn't. By March 1975, the outline surfaced. Hughes, a strange ship, a mission at sea. Not anatomy, a skeleton. On deck, labs staged core boxes and tidy ore hoppers. On shore, front offices shredded until fuses blew. A rumored follow-on, Matador, went blank. Barge schedules that had hummed went quiet overnight. Silence became a signal again. The phrase, neither confirm nor deny, slipped from a lawyer's page into culture. Foyer letters, editorials, jokes at dinner tables. It bought time, not amnesia. The public narrative settled into a shape that satisfied no one and protected what mattered most. Nobody with a badge and a title said the words on the record. At sea, physics had already graded the plan. In Moscow, calm hulls had already watched. The press didn't doom the mission. The mission had handed its rhythm to anyone patient enough to listen. The response was a shield, not a spell. What they actually got: intel, bodies, and silence. They laid the section on cribbing like it might still move if they weren't careful. Work lights washed bent plating in a tired yellow. No speeches, just checklists. Stakes shifted from audacity to obligation. If there was anything inside this torn shell worth a decade of budgets and risk, they had to find it without turning the deck into a spectacle. If there wasn't, then the mission's meaning had to live in smaller truths and the way they handled the dead. Action started clinical. Cameras first, 4 sides, then grids, then close-ups of edges where fracture told the story better than rumor. Technicians chalked numbers on surfaces that had last seen daylight in 1968, then popped access panels that didn't want to be persuaded. Water slid out of compartments like the last words of a sentence. Inside, fittings that looked ordinary until you remembered where they came from. The early finds were stubbornly technical. Valve blocks whose thread form and pitch confirmed Soviet machining standards, the kind of detail that ripples into maintenance estimates and acoustic models. Pressure couplings that told you what safety margin Soviet designers believed in when they spec'd operating envelopes. Wire looms with shielding that hinted at frequency choices for sonar and internal systems. A metallurgy kit shaved samples from frames and bulkheads, grain size, weld bead profile, heat-affected zones. Each shaving went in a bag with a number. Paper gave the steel a second life as data. Then the room went quiet in a different way. Bodies, not many, enough. Cold and depth had done the grim preservation no one wanted to think about. Men who'd stood watch for another flag were handled by men who knew what standing watch costs. Identification wasn't possible. Conditions didn't allow it, so they did what sailors understand. Flags, music held low by wind, short words, a deck crew that squared shoulders because dignity needs posture. A camera rolled, not for propaganda, but for record. That film would sit in safes for years. In 1992, it would be handed to the Russians, proof that in the middle of secrets, respect still crossed oceans. Back to steel. Analysts argued gently because the metal didn't care. One camp said this was priceless. Real hull in context, not a museum sample. Weld signatures can lead you to yard practices. Yard practices lead you to likely failure modes and service lives. Fastener choices narrow supplier networks. Networks map the industrial spine of an adversary. Cable shielding and routing tell you how vibration moves through compartments, which feeds into how noise escapes, and how to hunt it later. None of this is cinematic. All of it adds up. Another camp wanted the crown jewels: codebooks, key lists, fire control trays, missile interface hardware. Absence strung. No intact crypto safe. No whole missile logic rack. A torn frame suggested where something might have been. The compartment's scarring told 2 plausible stories. 1. Impact and corrosion had eaten the most delicate prize. 2. Someone else had been there first and either retrieved or buried what mattered most. Absence isn't evidence, a senior voice kept saying, like he was persuading himself too. Meanwhile, lab results trickled up the chain with the same stubborn defiance the ocean had shown. Weld heat inputs ran conservative, suggesting risk-averse yard doctrine in certain hull areas. That matters when you plan torpedo damage models or simulate buckling in dives. Grain structures in frames hinted at forging practices that would show up again in later classes. A small fitting carried a stenciled code that matched a thin file from years earlier, one more thread tied between rumor and reality. Acoustic folks found comfort in cable shielding choices, noise floors, and likely frequency bands that could nudge a beamformer's assumptions by just enough to count. Rumors tagged along because people filled gaps. A scorched navigation panel fragment, a bracket from a torpedo-related circuit, a frame that might have housed crypto-adjacent gear, empty now. Each item acquired meaning when it touched a hungry imagination. The program tried to keep imagination from rewriting physics. It mostly worked. It never works fully. Human cost stayed on deck. Operators who'd watched tension traces like lifelines sank into bunks and slept the way you do after a vigil. Engineers who'd warned about fatigue didn't crow. They counted joints and thought about threads. Case officers folded the burial into a narrative that could travel upstairs without breaking anything fragile. Deckhands who'd held stretchers smoked alone, not to forget, but to file the day in a place they could live with. Politics shaped the language. Briefings called it a demonstrated deep ocean capability. True. Significant material recovered. Also true if you define significance as what planners actually use. Handled remains with honor. Undeniably true. The slide that said partial recovery did not carry the weight in men's faces. In naval offices, gratitude for the feat mixed with frustration at the yield. Interagency cables trimmed edges depending on who had to defend which budget line next quarter. Still, doctrine moved. Confirmed compartment layouts corrected sketches held together by photography and guesswork. Evidence of cable routing and mount isolation informed updates to acoustic models. Even small brackets and bolts told stories about procurement ecosystems and the odds of parts sharing across platforms. You don't win wars with a valve stem. You do win warnings about how loud a pump might be on a Tuesday at 12 knots. And the whole stayed. No missiles, no safes intact, no tray full of tidy secrets. The ledger refused to balance cleanly. The operation taught the other side, too, how far the United States would go for scraps, what our cover rhythms look like when scaled, what respect looks like under pressure. The burial film traveled farther than any fitting. The image of an enemy honoring your dead lodges deeper than a diagram. When the crates were sealed and the deck scrubbed, the ship carried home steel, shavings, tapes, and a quiet burden. Intelligence lived in fragments. Meaning lived in how those fragments were handled. The ocean kept most of the story. What came up was enough to change a few models, a few minds, and a few men. The rest settled back into silt, guarded by pressure and by the calm confidence of watchers who'd read the rhythm and let physics do the rest. The ripple, how tactics and technology shifted. In the aftermath, the ocean stayed the same. The way people moved across it didn't. Moscow didn't hold press conferences. It redrew maps. Bastions hardened, Barents, Okhotsk, rings of protection where boomers could disappear under air cover, surface screens, and seabed ears that never appeared on charts. Long Pacific arcs gave way to shorter, defended patrol boxes. It looked like caution. It was doctrine. Force the hunter to come into your water and fight your noise. Orders became habits. Speed discipline on transits. Fewer hard turns. Isolation checks before sail. Yard work mirrored the shift. Tighter weld procedures, fussed shaft lines, coatings layered to shave decibels. In the 70s and 80s, designs matured. Victor III, then Acula, propellers and machinery mounts that made old SOSUS songs go flat. The signature that once rang like a bell blurred into fog. Deception got a seat. Trawlers towed tuned noise sources. Boy fields through false tonals. A diesel played ghost, broadcasting a larger blade beat, then going quiet while the real assets slid the other way. Patrol patterns added stutters designed to break correlation engines in rooms without windows. On the American side, confidence got humbler. SOSUS remained a cue, not a verdict. The word became stack, a fixed array whisper plus a towed array bearing, a satellite wake, a blink of Elliot. Hunters built probability, not faith. Beamformers got smarter. Operators trained not to fall in love with a line. Underice moved from exotic to expected. If bastions lived beneath shields, learn to breathe under them. Boats practiced vertical control until a yard of depth felt like a mile of consequence. Reactor management tightened. Charts became models of ridges and keels you couldn't bump without writing your name into history. Hulls changed. Skewed blades with finer edges, variable speed pumps on smarter mounts. Isolation that treated every bolt like an instrument string tuned to silence. Budgets argued behind closed doors. More stealth or more ears? The answer was yes. Wider aperture arrays and clever processing. Towed bodies flown like kites in thermoplanes. Aircraft sewing sonobuoys that told algorithms first and humans second. Yards fought barnacles with elastomers. The payoff showed up in decibels you had to subtract to notice. Counter-deception became workflow. Training lied on purpose. False persistence seeded into histories, decoys dressed in believable tonals. Crews drilled against tracks that promised too much and vanished on schedule. Analysts treated single-source beauty as suspect. If a sensor told the story you wanted, pair it with one that didn't care. The leak's shadow turned into policy. Assume ambient awareness. Scrub procurement rhythms like signatures. Red team the cover like a machine. Test the mask, not just the metal. Vary schedules on purpose. Bend resupply lanes just enough. Kill rhythm without killing the mission. The Soviet arc kept bending. Titanium experiments taught precision even when budgets balked. Yard culture absorbed lessons that didn't make the news. Tight tolerances, repeatable quiet, maintenance that treated phase and frequency like contraband. The result wasn't invisibility. It was difficulty, applied everywhere. Detections that once arrived at long range began to show up uncomfortably close. American methods answered with practical patience. Wide area indications fed models of today's water, not last week's. Prediction folded into decisions in real time. The boat that tested the model reported where the ocean lied. The goal wasn't certainty, it was advantage. A probable track handed to a patient hunter. A patient hunter trained to miss on purpose until the pattern reappeared where the math said it would. Communications doctrine tightened in places the public never sees. Bursts grew shorter and smarter. Beams narrowed. Windows moved. The lesson from crates, barge schedules, and clean hotel blocks sank in. Rhythm is a tell. Kill rhythm. Culturally, crews learned a quieter pride. A good patrol felt like boredom sharpened into discipline. Analysts phrased confidence like odds. Commanders asked for another ear or another hour and learned to choose. The hardest part stayed hardest. Believing the contact you almost have without convincing yourself it's already yours. All of it pointed back to that box northwest of Hawaii. Not because of what came up, but because of who was watching and how they waited. Physics taught engineers humility. Presence taught operators caution. Pattern taught counterintelligence a new prayer. May our habits stay ugly enough to be hard to read. The ripple wasn't a wave. It was a tide, slow and relentless, pulling doctrine toward a place where victory sounds like almost nothing at all. Today's echo. Why this still matters in the Pacific and Arctic. Fast forward to the map you scroll past every day. It looks calm. It is. The logic that hardened after that failed lift lives everywhere fleets take a breath. Russia tightened its circles. Barents and Okhotsk bastions layered with aircraft, surface screens, and seabed ears that don't appear on charts. Boomers cycle inside those rings under ice you can't satellite. It's not retreat. It's control. Make the hunter come to you and fight your noise, not theirs. China learned the same lesson in a different ocean. South China Sea outposts, radar towers, airstrips, hydrophones stitched into reefs, form a homemade bastion where Hainan boats exit, vanish, and return. Type 93A attack subs run escort logic today while quieter follow-ons, often labeled Type 95 and 96, push toward a lower acoustic profile. The playbook is familiar. Shrink the arena, saturate it with sensors you own, then randomize your rhythm until the model breaks. Stakes aren't academic. A silent SSBN sitting under ice or reef cover isn't a chess piece, it's a second strike promise. Misread that promise and crisis math turns brittle. After Glomar, both sides started treating rhythm like a weapon. The Russians kill their cadence, pump phases drift, speeds microstep, turns stagger to poison correlation. The Chinese do it with machine regularity, unpredictable convoy patterns, buoy fields that lie on schedule, fishing fleets moonlighting as picket lines with antennas that outgrow their hulls. Meanwhile, the listening world changed shape. The old wall of ears, SOSUS, still matters, but it's a cue now, not a verdict. Today it's a mesh. Fixed arrays, mobile gliders, wave riders dangling hydrophones, P8 sewing sonobuoys that text algorithms before a human even leans in. Feeds fuse in real time with ocean models that actually know the thermocline this hour, not last week. The picture feels omniscient until deception slides a brush over it. Then you're back to odds and patience. Under ice turned from stunt to standard. Russian and American boats navigate by math and nerve under pressure ridges that punish sloppy depth control. Communications windows tighten to flickers, burst transmissions on narrow beams, shifted by prediction and weather and solar noise. Near the pole, a mist burst because propagation changed isn't an inconvenience. It's a blank page where your rival writes their version of events. The lesson from barge schedules and clean hotel blocks carries here. Rhythm is a tell. Kill rhythm, or someone else will read you like a tide table. Case studies tell on everyone. A bore probably then. Off Norway becomes 3 versions of the truth. 1 comfortable to brief, 2 that make crews bite their tongues. In the Philippine Sea, a near pass generates press releases with perfect grammar and no overlap. Off Alaska, a track that looked like a Yason turns out to be a tuned trawler towing a clever lie, while the real submarine slides a thermal seam everyone thought too thin to matter. Doctrine updates quietly. Slides stay vague on purpose. Budgets argue in fluorescent rooms. More exquisite platforms or 1,000 cheap ears. Admirals say build the submarine you can't hear. Technologists say flood the water with sensors you can't fool. Operators say give us both, then teach us to wait. Money splits badly. The compromise that works in practice is ugly and effective. Put small ears everywhere, fuse their crumbs into a living ocean, then send a quiet boat to test the picture and tell you where it lies. Counter-deception drills grew teeth. Training injects false persistence into contact histories and dresses decoys in believable tonals. Crews learn to miss on purpose, to force a track to reveal whether it's a pattern or a story you want too much. Analysts stop loving single lines. If a sensor tells you exactly what you hope to hear, you bring in a sensor that hates that story and let the two argue. The human part hasn't changed. Watch teams still ride the hiss of the ocean, trying not to project patterns onto noise. Young analysts still learn the hardest rule. A perfect contact is usually bait or a model error. Commanders still bargain for another hour, another pass, and get told the window closes with the weather. And somewhere in a quiet office, a counterintelligence lead circles procurement spikes, hiring clusters, and conference abstracts and asks if a new mission is already teaching its outline to an audience. Here's the uncomfortable echo. The next billion-dollar lift under ice in a trench beneath a reef will wear a wardrobe as practiced as Hughes ever was. Research cruises, science gear staged for lenses, shells that invoice like commerce. The other side will read the cadence anyway. They'll park nearby, calm, and let physics grade ambition. If your plan depends on nobody noticing the pattern, you've already lost. So what actually works now? Widen the circle without widening the mouth. More red teams for the cover, not just the machine. Build redundancy into sensors and deception into your own signature. Vary schedules until they feel inefficient. Accept that efficiency is often a tell. And hold on to the one lesson the sea never stops teaching. It keeps its dead, and it keeps the proof. Our job is to make sure our habits don't give that proof away for free. The decision they dodged. Fix the blind spot or hide it. Fix cadence or polish myths. Red team covers, vary schedules, build skepticism, or defend rhythm and let rivals read you. The ocean keeps its dead. It also keeps the proof. If your plan depends on nobody noticing the pattern, you've already lost. Fix cadence, red team the mask, vary what feels efficient, or let rivals read you in real time. If this changed how you think about submarine warfare and secrecy, subscribe. Next, the detection failure that let a ghost walk through $1 billion worth of ears.